Welcome back. In continuation of the theme of earlier session, in current session, we will hear the experts from Multilateral Development Bank and private sector about how the procurement functions has evolved. There are the challenges ahead and innovations being pursued at this stage. These are important topics that are affecting many of our businesses. So we are honored to create this panel discussion on adding value to your procurement function. The panel discussion will be moderated by Mr. Nikhil, Gurjar, President and Foundation of Consulting Connoisseurs. Mr. N.S. Gurjar is the President of Consulting Connoisseurs, a management consulting based firm based out of Mumbai. He is a professional and strengthens in the area of modeling and stimulation based management consulting, project and supply chain management, and technology based transformation. He is a BTech in mechanical engineering from IIT Mumbai, a gold medalist MBA from NITIE Bombay, and the first class master level degree holder in intellectual property law from WIPO Geneva and UNISA Pretoria. His academic honors include the prestigious NCRT and All India Universal Science Talent Research Award, the first prize in the Godrej sponsored All India Business Plan competition, the Chairman Best Student Award, and the Director's Best Project Award at NITIE. Mr. Gurjar is a pioneer in the field of modeling and simulation-based management consulting in India and has also worked in several sectors including steel, materials, white goods, consumer goods, education, IT, robotic technology, government, and textiles. I would now take the opportunity to invite Mr. N.S. Gurjar as the moderator for this session. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Payal. I hope I'm audible.
Sir, we can clearly hear you.
Yeah, you can clearly hear. Okay, fine. So we are talking today about how futuristic supply chains are going to be and how the evolution of supply chains into the futuristic scenario is going to be. And that's going to be the central theme of what we have today. And I have two wonderful panelists with me. Panelist one is basically Meenakshi, and Meenakshi has actually been a supply chain professional with over 17 years of experience, has worked in various MNCs, typically in the manufacturing and the EPC sector. These include the Vedanta Resources, we have L&T, Bechtel, and currently she is associated with Air Products and Chemicals. She is also the global ambassador of the Society of Women Engineers since 2021, that is 2021, last year, and she is the president of the Vadodara affiliate of SWE. She is a BTech in chemical engineering and a certified Lean Six Sigma Black Belt and she's also a PNP and a CPSM, which is the ISM certification. So Meenakshi is here. We also have one of our other esteemed speakers who is from the Asian Development Bank, Rustam Abdukayumov. So Rustam is basically the director of Procurement Division 2 of Procurement, Portfolio and Financial Management Department, PPFD, in the Asian Development Bank, and he oversees procurement and consulting services and operations in East Asia, Southeast Asia, and Pacific countries. And Mr. Rustam has been with ADB for 21 years, so that's a long time. He has got rich experience in that. And he joined ADB in 2001 as a portfolio manager in ADB's Uzbekistan resident mission and later moved to become a procurement specialist in PPFD. His experience in ADB includes working on large and complex turnkey and civil work and supply contracts in the irrigation, transport, urban and energy sectors, carrying out country, sector, and project procurement risk assessments, procurement capacity assessments of executing agencies. He served as secretary to ADB's procurement committee, responsible for oversight of high value procurement transactions for PPFD management. Mr. Rustam is a national of Uzbekistan, and he obtained his master's degree in Oriental Studies in 1989 from Tashkent State University. So this is about Rustam. So I think the flow of the discussion would first be to allow Rustam to speak a little on his experience, and then Meenakshi also to speak on her experience a little bit, and then we will start delving deeper with certain questions. So over to you, Rustam.
Thank you very much, Nikhil. And first of all, thank you for inviting me to this conference. And I would like to say good day to all participants. I think today we wanted to share ADB's experience in terms of how we are trying to add value in the projects where ADB finances either a whole project or part of it. And maybe just to start with, we all know that the value for money concept or so called principle is not new and has been used in many countries for many, many years. And different countries have different approaches. In ADB's definition, this is one of the core procurement principles that enables to obtain optimal benefits through effective and efficient use of resources by applying not only price but other considerations such as socioeconomic, environmental, and sustainability considerations. And this is what our policy says. And In recent years, we have adopted a new procurement policy in 2017. And since then, ADB has increased its focus on delivering better value for money under ADB finance projects. And as we all know, there are many dimensions on how to measure VFM, and there are many, many different ways. In procurement, in general, we focus on few stages where we develop very specific approaches that we believe could contribute to achieving better value for money. So the first, I would say, will be the country partnership strategy stage when ADB and borrowers discuss about the engagement for the next few years. They discuss about the project pipelines. And in this process, our procurement specialists are team members of ADB team who is preparing this country partnership strategy, who conducts a dialogue with the government officials. This is undertaken normally every 3 to 5 years, and our focus is on carrying out procurement risk assessments at country level, at sector level, where ADB is going to invest, and sometimes at the agency level, ministries or departments, which will be then acting as executing agencies. The purpose of that exercise is basically to identify areas for improvements in the procurement systems, understand how the system works, what are the review arrangements, what is the capacity at different level within the government, so that we have better understanding of the national system, and we are trying to take this into account when we design projects. Then, when it comes to the project cycle, I would say that the three main stages where ADB basically focuses its efforts to achieve better value for money from procurement point of view. There are also other considerations not related to procurement, and this is our operations colleagues who also highlight what value addition they can deliver to our clients in implementation of the project as a whole. I'm talking here about more of procurement. It means procurement packages. So the first stage is project processing, right? During this stage, procurement specialists are team members of all project processing teams for all investment projects ADB would finance. They're responsible for so-called strategic procurement planning. This is the stage where we are trying to identify all risks related to that particular project. So we assess the EA's capacity, the executing and implementing agency's capacity, but also very importantly, we assess the supply market. We want to understand who are potential suppliers, bidders, who would then eventually be awarded contracts. We want to understand what are possible risks from ADB's perspective, from the borrower's perspective, but also from the supply side perspective. Why they are not bidding for a particular contract or for projects in a particular sector. Right? This helps us to identify the most fit for purpose procurement methods, contract types, and also propose different options for our clients. Because as we all know, when the risks are identified, it's easier to assess potential impact from such risks if they materialize, and also develop risk mitigating measures, which then are included in the project design, and there are basically resources allocated under the project for risk mitigating measures. So this is at the project processing stage. The next would be maybe something which is very familiar for our participants. This is a tendering stage. Of course, it starts with the preparation of the bidding documents, specifications, but this is the time where we also discuss with our clients what are the options, what are different approaches which we can use before we launch tenders. Because we have standard bidding documents, but we are flexible to introduce certain innovations if this is to brings us better benefits. Right. For example, our new procurement framework now allows us to use non-price evaluation criteria. Right. So previously it was always the lowest price. The winner would be the bidder who offered the lowest price. Now it's not necessarily the case. If there is an agreement between ADB and the borrower that, for example, a merit point scoring system could be used in evaluating bids. This is when the technical proposal is given certain score, the price proposal is given a different score, and then the bidder who has the highest combined score will win, but not necessarily the lowest price. So one example of non-price elements. Then we also increasingly see interest from borrowers to use so-called life cycle cost. This is mostly, of course, for contracts which have operation period. Maybe it's a DBO, design, build, operate type of contracts. But that helps for bidders to assess what will be the total cost of ownership, including disposal of the asset at the end of operation period. There is a quite big interest from borrowers lately, maybe in the last 5 years, in using life cycle cost. Then, as we all know, and I think the previous session discussed about, was sustainable procurement. This is something relatively new, and we are trying to work with our borrowers to promote the use of approaches and procurement which ensure more sustainability of the assets. Of course, it's not only related to so-called green procurement, environmental consideration. Sustainable procurement may have many different dimensions. It could be social, it could be institutional, because if there are no strong institutions, it's also difficult to ensure sustainability. So there are several different factors which could be used uh, for consideration in the options analysis at the tendering stage. And once agreed, we can basically translate them into the bidding documents, and then the tendering will be done based on those rules. And the next stage, of course, after the contract is awarded, uh, the most critical is to make sure that now these contracts are implemented, whether by contractors, suppliers, on time and within the budget, right? So therefore, our focus is on the contract management practices. We would like bidders and not bidders, contractors and the executing agencies to have a certain agreed approach on how they assess performance of contractors. Contract always has very clear provisions what needs to be done by each of the parties, but sometimes it's very difficult to monitor. And when there are some kind of non-compliances, probably it's too late to find a solution. We wanted to make sure that there is a proper monitoring system when everybody knows that there are certain actions to be taken from each side, and if one side did not take those actions, there are already next steps agreed what to do. So contract management is quite important from our perspective. And as I mentioned, our new procurement framework was introduced just 5 years ago. There are many new features, and since they're all new, not many clients are willing to adopt all of them. So there is a lot of kind of hand holding, capacity building, and we are trying to continuously promote the use of these new features so that borrowers are convinced that these are delivering better value for money, better benefits for them, right? And of course, also it's very important to keep in mind that assessing the risks early on, it's also quite critical in order to have a clear approaches on how to address those risks if they materialize. Sometimes risk assessment shows there is a risk, but the likelihood of it happening may be very low. But if the likelihood is very high, it's better to have some mitigating measures in place. Also, very important for us from ADB perspective. When we are talking about value for money, we are talking about it from the point of view of ADB and our clients, borrowers. But we would like to also get a feedback from contractors and suppliers, how they understand the value for money, what it is for them, how they decide whether it is good value for money for them or not, what kind of constraints they may have when they're trying to bid for ADB funded projects. So for us, it's quite important to hear feedback, and I would welcome if there will be some companies who would like to share their experience in today's session. Thank you. Maybe I will stop here and we'll see if there are questions.
Yeah, we will come back to you with a few questions. Before I go to Meenakshi, however, I just wanted to ask. So, when you're talking about, the involvement in these tendering processes and all that, are you seeing a large number of bad loans? And is there a trend that bad loans are decreasing with these new practices, or how is it?
You see, first of all, it's very kind of maybe early to make a full assessment of the impact of all these new reforms which we have introduced because it's uh, about 5 years since we have started that. And, the average project cycle is about 5 to 6 years. So some of the measures which we have already introduced will be completed maybe in 3, 4, 5 years' time. Then it will be possible to assess and say what we have discussed at the project preparation and during the tendering and during contract implementation. Yes, that has a positive impact because we will have to compare with the end result, right? The tendering could be excellent, but if there are some delays during contract implementation and then so the contract is delayed or it's over the budget, probably this is not a good outcome, but we have not reached that stage yet. So therefore,
Hmm.
we will need a bit more time to have more
Okay.
information and have a kind of more detailed assessment.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, over to you, Meenakshi. Could you just touch upon your journey and some of the highlights of that?
Yeah, hello all. Good day to you, and thanks for inviting me to this forum. We all know that procurement has come a long way from being operational, then tactical. Now they are telling strategic, and which the sustainability and the green procurement are the buzzwords. So I am here to share my experiences and discuss about the various emerging technologies in the procurement and how procurement can be seen as a value adding function to the organization. Looking forward to
Hmm.
further discussions. Yeah. Thank
Okay.
you.
So let me come back to uh, the the question on when you're talking about procurement becoming more strategic. So Meenakshi, vendor development is sometimes looked at as a double-edged sword, and I would also take Rustam's views on this. But many vendors often say that when you do more vendor development, most of the things are increased diligence and chance of exploiting more than developing a vendor. So how do you view this phenomenon in today's world?
I'm in the strategic sourcing department, and day to day, I'm involved in developing the vendors. According to me, vendor development is something like buyers are helping the vendors to improve their quality part, to improve their pricing. In fact, they are suggesting and helping the vendors to meet the requirement of the buyers and to add value to the organization. I would like to share one simple example. There will be many fabricators in India. So, for a particular organization, some cleaning, there is a requirement of a specific cleaning procedure, which many vendors or fabricators will not be having in India. And even in fact, having those facilities will cost too much to the vendor. So it is during the collaboration and during the vendor development stage, the buyer used to interact closely with the vendors and understand from the vendors what hinders them from offering these services, the specific cleaning services to the organization. Then vendor will come out. This is the amount, the investment I need to do of having a particular facility, and in India no one is availing the services. So if at all I have to have this, I should have a good volume of businesses. So all these things have cropped up. Why I'm suggesting is it is all happened during the vendor development stage. And then what the buyer did, the buyer understood the constraints of the vendor, why they are not able to provide the services that the organization is specifically looking at it. And then they worked out with the vendor. They understood, they checked the market, they thoroughly checked the market, and they found the specific services can be offered by the different service provider. Then they made a tie up with the vendor. In fact, it obviates the need to have a specific facility. The vendor need not have to have a different facility at his campus. Instead, he can avail the services of the third party vendor. So they made a tie up, and they have developed the vendor to avail the specific cleaning facility, so that the vendor can avail the facility and supply the material to the buyer. Now the vendor has successfully utilized it, and so many export projects the vendor is getting it. All these things are because of the collaboration and the vendor development stage. So it has to be seen at a with a proper eye, and it is a sensitive issue. If the vendor takes it as a improvement stage and develop his own facilities and his own quality issues, then it will be a successful one. And it should not be seen as a thing that we are exploiting the vendors and taking advantage of the vendors thing.
Mhm. Yeah, Rustam, you also are involved in lining up vendors. You said, so it's some to some extent.
Yeah, thank you. It's quite intriguing question. It's very sensitive. Uh, of course, you see, it's very difficult to argue that somebody is exploiting vendors because they are trying to participate in the supply contracts, for example, through the tendering process. If I will talk about Asian Development Bank or other multilateral development banks, we always support open competition, right? So we are providing equal opportunities for all vendors to participate so that they can compete among themselves. For us, what is more important is the final outcome, right? So that
Mm.
we make sure that the best vendor at that particular time period who can supply a particular item has been awarded a contract, and that brings benefits to our clients, right? So therefore, we are trying to and also uh, enhance capacity of vendors of our bidders, but not selectively, because we want to share information transparently with all vendors, potential vendors, so that they understand how to compete under ADB finance projects. What are the basically requirements? What are common mistakes other bidders make? so that they learn, and it means they are improving their chances to win in the next round, right?
Mm.
But we also want to understand, as I think mentioned also, the feedback from vendors, especially because we finance many infrastructure projects. It's large contractors, right? The big contracts, hundreds of $1 million. Why sometimes they are not interested,
Mm.
or why their bid prices are in making decision not to bid or price very high. Is it because of the contract types? Because different contracts have different allocation of risks between, say, vendors, suppliers, and the clients, right?
Yeah.
So we are also trying to understand from their perspective and ready to take this into consideration. But in terms of our efforts to improve vendors or suppliers' kind of capacity, we conduct so-called business opportunity seminars, explaining ADB processes, where to find business opportunities. But of course, it's I mean, relatively easy to find all this information on ADB website. But then the vendors themselves, they should have their own strategy to decide where, in which region, in what sector they would like to focus their efforts and bid, because they cannot just submit bids everywhere, right? Because that also costs money.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we are trying to kind of share as much information as we can with the bidders, and we will continue doing that.
Mm. Thank you. So I would again go to the next, question to Meenakshi, specifically because you talked more about new product introduction. And so, what are the specific challenges, from a procurement perspective that one would encounter in new products when we are introducing new products? You are on mute. Could you unmute yourself, please?
Yeah. Thanks for this question. During this new product development stage, many times what happens in the organization is the product manager, the lead design engineers, they all will interact with the vendors, and they will finalize the vendors. For this particular compressor or blowers model, this is the vendor and this suits my requirements. This is my product requirement, all those stuff. So what they miss out in the initial stages is they will not include the procurement professional, which actually should be the case, the strategic sourcing professional. So what it happens when it comes to the actual product rollout, uh, whether the vendor has the capability and capacity to cater requirements today, tomorrow, if you are envisaging some 4 or 5 projects in a row, whether the vendor has the capability to suffice to meet our requirements, that and all will not be taken care of, and the vendor's financial capability will be missed out. So all these things will crop up when the strategic sourcing professionals are getting involved at a later stage and not during the initial stage itself. So this is the major problem that I encountered during my role with the strategic sourcing procurement. So had the team involved the strategic sourcing professional during the initial stage itself, the sourcing professional would have ensured that the vendor's capability, capacity, and the financial strength are up to date, and they can meet the requirements of the organization, so that we will not have any surprises in the future. But in many cases this is not happening, and this is the major challenge that as a procurement professional uh, faces during the new product development stage. So once the vendor is fixed and I want to utilize this vendor for this particular component, whether the vendor is able to meet the requirements or not, it was not taken care of. So once we want to launch the product in the market, in the last minute people used to have surprises. Oh, the vendor doesn't have this facility, he can't produce this much. So all these surprises will crop up. This is the major challenge as a procurement professional we face during the new NPD.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very interesting point because you're talking about making it more strategic. So, my question to Rustam, considering the strategic part, so do you feel public procurement is becoming a strategic function in ADB's client countries? And what more should be done in this direction? So, there are two questions here. Is it becoming more of a strategic function? And what more do you think needs to be done? You are on mute. You will have to unmute your mic.
Yeah. Thank you for this question. Yeah. When we talk about strategic procurement, in my understanding, this is when we know 3, 4 steps ahead what may happen or may not happen when we do procurement. And of course, it's very important in this area to have a strong professional cadre of procurement specialists who have that experience, who have the skills to basically understand what will happen not only tomorrow, but in a year's time and 5 years' time when one procurement exercise is completed. So, therefore, I think the procurement should be a strategic function within the government institutions because of that benefits, but also because of this enables the governments, the executing agencies, to have a permanent pool of professionals who know their job. Yeah, they have clear responsibilities, but at the same time, they have a career path. Yeah, because when there is a strategic function within, say, a government entity, and somebody applies for that, so that means that person is willing to stay as a procurement professional in that area, not move from one place to another very frequently. And what we see, this professionalization of procurement function is at different stages in different countries. Some have very well established systems where they train procurement professionals. They have courses in universities. They have separate courses, basically they deliver it, and then they, those who complete it, they have certificates. It officially recognized certificates confirming their basically experience and quality as a professional. In some other countries, it's still at the very early stages. And there we see a lot of staff rotation because people who are basically performing a procurement function, but without having that function clearly defined in the government entity, they are not, they do not have strong incentives to stay there. So if there are some other opportunities, they may leave. So, and this is, of course, not a good outcome. So we
Hmm.
are trying to help all our member countries in developing a proper, system where procurement is recognized as a profession. But
Hmm.
we try to share experience among the countries. For example, those who have a relatively good advanced system in the professional training in procurement, they share their experience with other countries. Something can be learned from these country between country exchanges. We also share international best practices, and that work is ongoing for many years, and it will continue, right? Because as I said, some countries are still
Yeah.
not at the required stage. But not only we are not only trying to help in that dialogue and exchange of information, but just to give an example, this year, ADB, in collaboration with the International Labor Organization, we have developed our own training program for procurement professionals. So it's tailored to ADB's processes, but also covers the main kind of key aspects of procurement function. And we offer this to our client countries, to all executing implementing agencies. When we advertised that, we received more than 600 kind of interest from more than 600 government employees. But we will start a bit maybe slowly. So this year there will be about 70 participants from different countries enrolled, and there will be more next year. Uh, and that training basically combines online self learning, then physical classroom type of learning, and then the most important is the exams. It's not just like training where participants just attend and receive a certificate of attendance. This will be actually a proper exam where the participants they will have to pass a minimum score, and only after that they will be given a certificate. But the certificate will be officially recognized. So this is what we are trying to do from our own end. But of course, if there are some other programs developed in one country and another country would like to use that and introduce in their own system, we would always support. So
Mhm.
uh, currently, we have basically two prone approaches. One is to disseminate all the information available in terms of this uh, training programs and system that the different countries use. But also, second is we have our own training program. And since it's not a short training program, it could be a couple of years, uh, depending on how much time the participant will take for online learning courses. So that will be a bit of a long journey. Some countries maybe will be moving faster, some maybe a bit slower, but I think it's the right direction for all of us to ensure that eventually the countries will have a robust training system, and procurement professionals will be recognized as basically professionals working within that government structures, right? And
Yeah, yeah,
will uh, implement not only ADB projects, right? Because we are not so much focused on delivering ADB projects. We just want to make sure that particular country has a strong system where procurement professionals are recognized and they contribute to implementation of projects. And that means many countries they have their own budget resources when they basically procure and implement contracts without any involvement of external partners, but they still need procurement professionals. So I hope this will help them to implement their projects better in terms of quality and time.
yeah. Thanks, Rustam. I would like to, invite Meenakshi to give us the private organization, Indian private sector perspective on this. So, what are the manpower or skill and talent development challenges which Rustam had just touched upon as how they are working on? And how would you recommend one should go about these challenges as a private entity? You work at a corporate level.
Yeah. It's a very good question. As a private organization, many organizations they will have the different way of working, though they are in the same business structure. While recruiting the people for the procurement, I strongly believe that the internal candidate should be given the preference because they know how the company operates. They know what is very essential for that organization. What are all the things that has to be taken care. What aspects are given importance for that organization? I just want to clarify. I'm not against having the external candidates, but I emphasize that if at all any vacancy crops up in the procurement, it is always better to fill that gap within the procurement department itself, the first thing, so that the person is aware of the procurement practices as well as the company culture and the needs of the organization. The second thing is, if at all there is no enough talent available within the procurement group to fill the gap, then we can look out for other team members, say from engineering, who can bring added value experience regarding the engineering aspects also, and how they can use the engineering experiences in implementing the better procurement practices and strategies. So these are the two things that can be taken care of while filling the positions for this procurement manpower. And my own feeling is that it should be the last option to hire the procurement talent from the outside organization, though it is from the same industrial environment. Then coming to the point how the procurement professional can be trained and the skills can be improved, it is all through the curated training. what is required. If at all I am implementing the projects in India itself, what are all the different tax structures that are available in the Indian market, and what is the import and export duties for this Indian area. So all these things, it has to be a curated training particular to that specific role. And uh, so that way we can improve the skills of the procurement manpower. Now there is a crunch in this procurement talent. Many people think that okay, he has already handled procurement in some other organization, handled some other things, and he can very well perform it. I don't deny that, but in the initial phase, the proper training and exposure to be given to the procurement manpower.
Yeah, that is great. So I think there is a lot of commonality between what Rustam was talking about and what you were talking about. My next question is a little bit of a trick question. It's a little bit of an observation also. We talk about customer ego. So there is an ego of the customer, and even the financier also can have his own ego. So the customer ego and the financier's ego, what's the futuristic scenario? Do you see that this ego level of your customer, or you are as a buyer, you are the customer, do you see these ego levels are going to increase? That is technology fueling expectations. So we see that with technology we can do many more things. So are we fueling more expectations for the buyer and driving up the ego of the buyer and the financier? And is this also driving kinds of false values when we talk about ego? So it's more of a philosophical question here. So I would like your views on that. Meenakshi, could you start with it?
Yeah, sure. First of all, you asked me about the buyer ego, me being the customer, maybe. I would say, like, whatever the buyer ego a procurement professional was having 10 or 15 years back when I started my career, I feel it has come down a lot. Now people
Mm-hmm.
understood, like, unless and until we collaborate with the external vendors, even if he uh, being my supplier also, I understood that unless and until we have the collaborative approach, the vendors are not going to support us at times of need. Previously it was like the buyer has to negotiate hard, get the best prices, but now the scenario is getting changed. Now everyone understood it is through the collaborative approach with the vendors that we can get the best quality, price and delivery. So in my opinion, the ego level is not going to get increased over a period of time. In fact, I would say that it is getting reduced.
Yeah, Rustam, could you touch upon the
Now the
financier's ego?
Uh, we do not use these kind of terms, whether supplier's ego or vendor's ego. We are trying to help our client countries to achieve better outcomes. Right. But yeah, this is quite an interesting topic. Just maybe to rephrase, if we don't call it ego, we call it bargaining power. This is where the problem would be, right? Because it depends on a sector, on a particular item which is under question, where sometimes if there are too many suppliers, then of course the client has more bargaining power. They have a bigger pool to select from, right? But in certain sectors, there are some very specific niche areas where there are only limited suppliers. They know that, right? And of course, their bargaining power will be much, much bigger. So that is not static. Yeah, it changes. So something which was very unique 10 years ago and the suppliers had a very strong bargaining power, they don't have it anymore because those technologies became more common. But at the same time, there are new technologies emerging, and those who are kind of the pioneers, they will have a stronger bargaining power. So this is the reality, right? But I think it's important for clients, for borrowers, to understand with whom they are dealing. What is the supply side, right? Because I
Yeah.
appreciate Meenakshi's explanation that it's good to have preferred vendors. That's of course fine, but in our financing projects, we promote more open competition for different reasons. So firstly, to give opportunities to all potential suppliers vendors because this is public money, right? So we would not
Hmm.
want to see that some are getting preferential treatment and all the money goes to a particular type of suppliers. But also there are other risks, yeah, because you see, we often hear from our clients that we don't want to do open competitive bidding because it takes too long, right? Uh, it's a very long process. Instead, we would like to have a direct contracting. We allow direct contracting in certain scenarios, but this is also not a solution. I mean, it's not the only way. I mean, it's not a golden bullet, right, to solve all the problems. Because we have seen many cases where we agreed with the direct contracting. Then, firstly, the client spends a lot of time in negotiating these contracts. There is no tendering, and the one who is in the direct contracting knows that this vendor is the only one. So the
Yeah.
client doesn't have option two. So of course they will try to push for their own interests. So those negotiations are protracted. So the time saying which they were initially thinking may not be fully achieved. But
Hmm.
secondly, what is also quite important, if that contractor fails, so whether it's a vendor or supplier, cannot perform the contract, the employer or the client has no idea who are potential substitutes in the market because it was not tested on the through competitive bidding, right? So then there will be another bigger issue if the contract fails, what to do next. So you don't want to continue with this vendor, but then probably you will have to go again through a tendering process to identify a replacement. And that means going back to square one, where the whole objective was to save time. It will not be saved, right? But in a broader sense, I think what we are trying, number one, for borrowers to fully understand in what markets they're operating, and that requires a lot of data collection. So we as ADB, we do not have this data. So we would like this data to be collected, right? And say we may have only 10 projects in a particular country, which finances, say, 20 contracts, and we know that niche, only that part of the market,
Hmm.
but the government budget maybe finances 200 projects with the
Yeah.
500 contracts. So that information we do not have, but we are kind of encouraging the governments to have that kind of procurement data about bidders, about their capacities, because some bidders who are strong now, they could be declining in few years' time because of different reasons, but some who were small, they're growing up. So the market changes.
Hmm.
So I think borrowers should be fully aware. I mean, in our term, it's borrowers, but in other term, it's the clients, right? The financier should be fully
Yeah.
aware
Yeah. The
because of it.
customer. Yeah.
Now I'll stop here.
Yeah. Yeah. So touching on this because when you said the condition now is different from the condition what was say 5 years ago. So specifically looking at COVID and post-COVID, like Bhatraji had also mentioned, there has been an acceleration due to COVID. But I also see the ramifications of that. So a lot of companies have been facing difficult financial situations. And my question to Meenakshi, in this looking at the corporate scenario, has this impacted and put a new constraint on the way procurement practices are done today? And do you see that there is a lot of policy and practice change, especially with the size of the organization? And this size of the organization, I would again come back to Rustam because talking about the larger projects and how it is done in the larger pre and post COVID, what kind of changes are. So first, we'll hear out what Meenakshi has to say.
Yes, I fully agree with the statement that has been made by you, sir. Uh, there is a difference in the pre-COVID and post-COVID, the way we operate. I fully agree that much emphasis has been given on the vendor financial status. Uh, though pre-COVID levels also we used to check the financial status, but now it has been made mandatory, and with the detailed thing we are evaluating the vendor's financial status. In fact, the shop loading capacity of the vendor. This also
Hmm.
makes a very important factor while choosing the vendor, whether the vendor will be in
Hmm.
a position to take my order, will he be in a position to execute my order, if at all I give the order, whether he has the financial strength to execute it. All these things are being discussed and reviewed in detail. And one more
Okay.
thing, and now even for making the payments, the advance payments or the payment after the supply of the material, the retention payments, all these things are now there are strict procedures and the policies have been implemented, which takes care of the financial needs of both the vendors and the buyers, so that the vendor will not break down while execution, and the buyer also will not lose if god forbid any mishap happens in the future. uh, and one more thing, and after this covid, much emphasis on being given on not only to the vendor sub supplier also.
Oh,
We
okay.
are just reviewing it. If at all I give the previously, what will happen? Okay, I am giving this order to this vendor. Let that be in India. We don't mind where the vendor source the sub components. But after COVID, we are also doing the due diligence. If at all the vendor is going to outsource some of the components, from where they are doing it, we want to keep a track on the sub supplier also. So tomorrow, if any COVID kind of situation happens, we should not end up that as a sub supplier also or all in the particular geographic area that got affected very badly, and so we are not able to get our material on time. So this is a way on this financial progress and the shop loading capacity and the vendors sub suppliers, all these things, there is a change between the pre covid and the post covid situation.
So, Rustam, you had said that you had rolled out those changes in 2017, but COVID occurred in 2019-20. So, have you reviewed some of those changes? Have you made some of those changes in this?
No, you see, the policy and new framework which was approved in 2017 still in place, because
Okay.
these are broader principles, broader features which will remain. Of course, during COVID, we know there was a big impact, not only on suppliers but also on the clients, yeah, on the buyers. So we have introduced a few, not changes, or flexibilities, trying to help both parties, right? Because, for example, contractors or suppliers, they are affected because of this supply chain disruptions. They could not complete their contracts, and then many contracts were suspended, basically, right? So they
Hmm.
did not receive the revenues they expected. They did not receive the profits they expected, and that continued for quite a long period of time. So they're suffering financially, right?
Hmm.
It means they maybe uh, it's difficult for them now to bid for new contracts because they were sitting idle for such a long period of time. But for clients, for buyers, they also are affected because the prices went up, right? And even if they want to continue the contracts which are already signed, probably they will have to pay more because the prices of materials and this supply chain shipment disruptions, all these
Yeah.
contribute to the price. So both sides are affected. Uh, what we and in addition to that, there are new requirements basically prompted by COVID pandemic. This is increased focus on the health and safety measures, right? We have introduced
Hmm.
additional clauses in our bidding documents and the contracts requiring contractors to comply with local protocols related to health and safety. It's not big in terms of cost, these additional measures, but this requires a lot of skills and basically dedicated resources from contractor side, right? Uh, then, as I have already said, if the company didn't work for 2 years roughly, so then it means they cannot demonstrate any past experience during last 2 years.
Exactly.
Normally,
Yeah.
in one of our criteria, we say X number of contracts of similar size during last 3 to 5 years.
Three
But
to
if you
five.
take
Yeah.
the last 2 years, then it means they cannot demonstrate, they will not be able to meet the requirements. So we are thinking about that and trying to make it more flexible. So instead of the last 3 years, we could say 5, 6, 7 years, so that we
Mm.
take into account their pre-COVID experience, because it's their own experience. It did not disappear, right?
Mm.
In terms of financial
Yeah.
resources, yes, of course, no revenues, all annual financial statements will be completely different, right? So some of them are negative.
Yeah. Yeah.
We require positive for last 3 years, but if you ask now, hardly anyone will qualify. So we're also making that more flexible. And actually, what we allowed is for companies, if they cannot demonstrate that they meet financial resources requirement by themselves, they can use what we call affiliate companies guarantee. But basically, it means their
Mm.
parent company, if they have resources, they can provide this guarantee that yes, in case if that company wins the contract but will have difficulties in basically financing, because they pre-finance, right, in civil works, and then
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
reimburse,
Yeah.
the parent
Mm.
company will have to basically provide that required financing. In many
Mm.
countries, we agreed not to have the bid security as a uh, bank guarantee, because it also costs money.
Mm.
We agreed to have a bid securing declaration, which doesn't cost money. It's basically commitment, yeah, from the bidder to say that my bid is valid until X certain date. So there are many different measures, but I think the issue is quite big, and
Yeah.
it will
Yeah.
be very. I mean, it will
Yeah.
be quite a long time to see the recovery. Now, only this year, some of these big civil work contracts have resumed, and I'm interested myself to see how contractors perform, because they were awarded contracts just before the COVID, and they could not
Okay.
move
Okay.
because in many countries there were, very strict
Lockdowns and things. Yeah.
basically restrictions, lockdown, right? But they had certain agreements with their suppliers, subcontractor, Meenakshi mentioned. Those are also affected. Now
Yeah.
everything has resumed, and we want to see how they're progressing, because just to learn, right? Because we still have new projects, we still have new contracts to be awarded, so we have to learn from that past lessons.
It's interesting because both of you have given kind of diametrically opposite strategies that you have used. One is tightening the financial belts, and the other one is releasing it a little more. Okay, I'll take a couple of questions from the viewers. So, this is a particularly interesting one. How do you bring about more trust between the procurement professional and the management team? Because this role is always looked at as a suspicious one, and despite all the transparency measures that we have. Yeah, maybe let's start with Meenakshi.
This is really a tricky question. I would say it is all through the action of the procurement professional, because trust is a big thing. And though we have all the systems in place now, we are getting all the bids through the online thing, online portals, and everyone can track it. So though there is the transparency, it is, I can say it is 100% of the transparency. Uh, so trust, it has to be purely through the actions, and the rapport that is being shared with the management team. it,
So,
it
in
has
a
to be demonstrated by
futuristic scenario, how do you see you can develop more trust?
I would say
What
in the
needs to be done?
present scenario itself, I would say enough measures have been taken to be more and more transparent. Gone were those days there, where only procurement professional will have the access to the bids or something like that. But now the scenario is changing. Through this online systems, everyone, the persons who are all authorized, it is a committee of team members, they are having all those access to the procurement professional. And the procurement professionals, they are also demonstrating by their day-to-day actions and the way they project themselves. By this way we can bring much more trust between the management and the procurement team.
Okay, we have run out of time, but there's a last 1 minute. So maybe Rustam, if you want to add in 1 minute, that will be the end.
Thank you. Yeah, I would like to say that probably there are slightly different goals of the management team and the procurement professionals. So the management team would look at the final outcome of the project, right? Whereas the procurement team, they're involved in the process and the transaction. But to build the trust, I think management team has to better understand the benefits of having a strong procurement professional, because if we have such, they are not only basically ensuring that the procurement is done properly, but they have experience, past experience to share with the management team what may happen if something is not done properly at the early stages. That's why if we come back to this professionalization of procurement, that's very important. If you have a strong professional who has 10 years of experience, he or she may share this 10 years of experience with the management team and say, sir, if we follow this, this is the potential outcome. If we follow that, it will be different. So then the management team will decide what is the best option. But if we don't have a strong professional who doesn't have this 10 years of experience, there is very little to share. And then, of course, there will be a bit of tension. I think to build trust,
Yeah.
better to have a stronger procurement professional who can basically contribute more to achieving the outcome.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Having handled public procurement myself in the past, it's really interesting to see the different perspectives. And now that I advise companies on this area, it's again, a wide variety that we are seeing. But thanks a lot. I mean, the panel was a great one, and we really got to see how the different, areas are panning out. Over to you, Payal. Yeah.